Hello, everybody. Um, this is Norma. I wanted to um, make sure that we had a conversation about how to prepare your PLC data analysis form. I know we had a really good discussion at last Friday's PLC at Penicotti. I thought that the discussion was really good. We spent some time surfing through the EDM system and try and figure out what the different reports that we could pull. Um, so I wanted to go ahead and make a little run through as to my thinking and the way that I filled it out, just so that you guys can have as a model. And when you guys work with your team on Friday for PLC, you guys can kind of have an idea. Again, this is me just kind of planning, pretending that this is my group of students. Again, I'm using the entire 8th grade team data from Penicotti, so I'm not picking any particular teacher. So just kind of running through the steps. And again, all of this piece is us assessing what do we want our students to learn. Okay, so Sue went ahead and filled out this information at the top. We have this particular data analysis form is focusing on ELA 8th grade core. And here we have the assessment ID number. Okay. So provided are some helpful links that could be used to look at this data. Okay. So the first part that's important is this is why some of the teams spend the time to identify what the essential standards, because we've already talked about how there are a lot of standards and we can't possibly teach all of them, but we need to prioritize based upon what we find are the needs of our students. So the nice thing, this common assessment that we're looking at for collection 2 focus on these standards here, mostly reading informational and reading literature. So citing textual evidence, looking at different elements of literacy and assessing the complexity of, to assessing students' ability to comprehend complex text independently, and then some of the grammar language standards. Okay. All right. So on this next little section, again, we have the information on the test, but I think the first thing you need to do when you look at your data, the nice thing is that this document that's being used here at Penicotti is asking us to insert our data here. So Friday, Mr. De Vicente and the team were collabing on what are the better reports. So for that, we logged into EDMs. So make sure that you log into your EDMs and make sure that under the Reports tab, click on Group Reports. Under Group Reports, and you can go ahead and click on Standards-Based Report. Make sure that you fill in this drop-in menu. So this is going to be for our school, Penicotti. If you're looking at your data specifically, you want to identify your information here. I'm going to do general, the whole 8th grade team. And I'll tell you how I know that I'm only looking at 8th grade. So the way that I pulled it up, I notice when I've done a couple searches already, so it's kind of staying on my record of searches. So I'm just going to go ahead and click View Report. If you don't have this because you haven't used it as much, you just go back to your form, highlight your test ID, go back to your items, and under Test Search, you're going to paste your test ID. If this option comes up for you, go ahead and click View Report, but I'm just kind of going this route too, so you could see that you can do it this way. Okay, so I went ahead and entered my test ID, then I click Search, and then now I can go down here in this area and go ahead and click on View Report. And this is the one that Mr. De Vicente was helping us with. This is like the overall. And so we want to click on this little icon here. It's going to give us that nice graph, because the form that we're now using is asking us to provide a visual Okay, so here's what Sue and I were kind of looking for everywhere, and it was like right in our faces. So that was really cool. So yeah, so we did Command Shift 4 to make a copy of this image. Command Shift 4, and you'll notice that little cross comes up. You can just make a copy of it. Okay, and then you'll pull it into your document. And you'll see overall data here. It's important to note the number of students that were tested. 389 students were pulled in this sample. These were the test strands that we talked about. These are the number of items that were assessed. And then this is the student average. You have the overall average 41. You have the individual strands there. Okay, so we went ahead and pasted that onto this document. Okay, and I wrote in the number of students that took the test. That way I know, just as a reference for myself. Okay, so there's a visual. So that's a start. So just from looking at this data, these are some of the data statements about that I was able to come up with based upon this information that I have here. So from that, a couple of things. I'll read a couple. It says with a 40% overall average score, the 8th grade students did not meet minimum proficiency in the standards tested in this assessment. So overall, I need to know, how did my students do? Typically you want to get our students to perform at 70%. So did they meet that minimum requirement? And the answer is no, they did pretty miserable. Okay, so now let's look at more information. So another thing that that we can pull from this data is that with a 74.8% overall average, 8th graders met minimum proficiency on items from the language and written and oral English language convention strands. And then the next one you could look at is with the 32.7 overall average, 8th graders performed below minimum proficiency on items from the reading informational text strand. And just another observation that for this end of collection assessment, students did not meet minimum proficiency on both the reading, literary, and informational text standards. So reading definitely was a highlight of area of need. Okay, now for this one, what we're asking for our teams to do is to really look at this data and be able to identify what our students are doing well. This way we can use that to build on the areas of weakness, the areas of deficiency, and then being able to identify the areas of challenge, then we can focus on those areas so we can come up with the solution for that. Okay, so in order for me to answer this part of the document, again, going back to your items, okay, so remember, right now I have my report pulled by strand summary. It was important for me to go to by standard. So if you click on this little section of select report, click on by standard, okay? And this is a good report because it pulls my student comment assessment according to standards, and that's very important because again, what we're focusing here is answering the question, did our students learn what we wanted them to learn? Okay, so I need to focus all of this information on standard proficiency. So going back to my items report, the report automatically is pulled by standard, and it describes your standard, and then it sorts the data. You can either sort it by percent correct or percent incorrect. So automatically when you log on to this one, it's going to automatically sort it by percent incorrect. So you notice that under reading literary 8.1, you have two items, question number 1, question number 2. So of these two questions, these are actually from this literary standard. Okay, 8.1, literary reading literary text. Okay, of these two questions, the overall performance on these two questions, students tended to get 89.3% incorrect on these questions, and only 10.7% of the students got this part correct. So this is how you could see overall how your students did on that standard. So this is important to look at those areas. And just like anything, obviously we want to improve everything that our students are not doing right, but I would focus on three major areas. And so in looking at these, Mr. Tippy and I kind of were diving through some of these standards and looking at this data. One thing is to know just kind of general standards that students did not perform in. And after that, it's a good idea to click on your question. That way you can get a by item detail report. Okay, so this is answering, trying to find out a little bit more about the question and what could have possibly tripped up the student. So like on this particular question, question number 1, I can note right away that this was a question that stemmed from a poem. It says the author of the poem wishes happiness upon the person she addresses. It says click 2 lines that best support this inference. So my students would have needed to understand inference. Okay, so yes, so you have to look at that. You have all the answer choices here. In this report, if you look at the bottom, it says items that were in bold. That was the correct answer. Oops. These were the correct answers because remember 2 items were supposed to be selected. Okay, and the one in red is the one that students selected and was not correct. Okay, so you can see this one here. At the bottom here, you can look at the percent of responses. So you can see that 11.1% of the students picked M and N. Okay, so that was the correct one. 11.6 picked M and J. So clearly you could see that students did not miss that detail that asked them to click 2 lines, not 1. So that's good. So that's important to know. So in order for me to go back to where I was, again, I'm going to just go to select report and go back to by standard. Okay, and you can take a look at the different questions there. So you'll see reading